looks like I have a halo over my head. Look at that. That's a bright idea. No. Here, there we go. How's that? So how often have we heard the word boundaries, right? People are always talking about boundaries. What's a boundary? A boundary is like a personal policy, or it's a limit or a rule that we set for ourselves. Basically, it gives us the right to say no and not feel guilty about it. If you think of boundaries as being like a sidewalk or a road with guardrails on it, you create boundaries in order to stay safe. So if you stay on this sidewalk, remember when you were a kid, you would play this game like alligator or something like that. So if you step off the sidewalk, there's alligators on this side and there might be like snakes on the other side. So you have to stay on the sidewalk. Remember those kind of games? Well, I used to play them. I don't know about you. If you didn't, then you missed out. But the point is, if you think about boundaries as being like a protection, of like staying on the sidewalk, or if this was a road and there were guardrails along the side, then you would stay on the road, because if you drove off the road, that would be a problem. So there's three main types of boundaries. There's rigid boundaries, porous boundaries, and healthy boundaries. So the rigid boundaries are the kind of people that like avoid intimacy and close relationships because it's just too much for them. They're not really likely to ask for help. They will if they absolutely have to, but they're not the kind that just goes and asks for help. They have close relationships, but not many. So they have like few close relationships. They're very protective of personal information, so they're not really good at sharing deep stuff with, they have like hopefully they have one close relationship, like a spouse or something. They can seem kind of detached, even from romantic partners, and they tend to keep other people at a distance to avoid any possibility of rejection. That personality type, or that boundary type, tends to fall into the category of the avoidant attachment style that we talked about a couple months ago, whenever that was. They tend to be the kind to keep to themselves, and they don't let people in really easy. Then there's the porous boundaries. It's not like porous, but it's like porous, like with lots of holes in it. Porous boundary people tend to share a lot of information, whether you want to hear it or not. Sometimes it's the mother of all TMIs, right? They have difficulty saying no when somebody else asks them to do something. They tend to be the kind of people that get over-involved in somebody else's problems. They can be super dependent on other people's opinions. They're like approval seekers. And they tend to be the kind that more readily accepts the abuse and disrespect of a bad relationship because they just don't think they're worth it. And they fear rejection from other people if they don't comply with whatever that person asked them to do. Healthy boundaries are the people that they value their own opinion, and they don't feel the need to be oversharers or approval seekers, and they don't compromise their values for somebody else's opinion. And they don't share, they share personal information, but they share it in appropriate ways. They don't get overshare, they don't undershare. They know when to share and when not to share, and who with. They can say no to other people and be fine with it. They also know their personal wants and needs. Not everybody knows that, and it's surprising how many people don't know that. Most people have a mix of boundary types depending on the circumstance. Like some people have a rigid boundary at work, but they'll have a more porous boundary at home, or they'll have a healthy boundary at home, or whatever. Some cultures have different expectations about what to share and when to share and who to share it with, and what kind of emotions you can show and you can't show. Then there's the different types of boundaries, like physical boundaries. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's physical space, or personal space, and physical touch. Personal space can be like when somebody, he invaded my space, gets in your face just to talk to you. Those crowd people that, I can't remember what Seinfeld called them. The close talkers, that's what they were. So you get close talkers. They invade your personal space. So that's the personal boundary you have. Most people's personal boundary is anywhere from 3 to 5 feet, 3 to 6 feet. Well, 6 feet now because of the COVID thing. Healthy physical boundaries include an awareness of what's appropriate and what's not. Physical boundaries can be compromised when somebody touches you when you don't want them to, or even if they invade your personal space, not just your face space, but like your house or your room or your car, or like a table that you're sitting at. Emotional boundaries refer to a person's feelings, and feelings and emotions are actually two different things Someday we will get to that on another video. Emotional boundaries, healthy emotional boundaries include limitations on what to share, when to share it, who to share it with. So basically you're not an oversharer or an undersharer, as the case may be. Emotional boundaries are violated when somebody criticizes you or belittles you for the emotions that you're feeling, or they invalidate them completely. An example of that is like when you are grieving somebody or something, like especially if you've lost a pet, because a lot of people disregard that as being actual grief. People can violate your emotional boundaries, if you want to call it violating emotional boundaries, when they belittle you for grieving a pet, or if you've lost a family member or a friend or whatever, you know, a year ago, 2 years ago, or whatever, that they're going, well, aren't you over it yet? No. So that kind of belittling or invalidating or criticizing what you're feeling or your emotions is not healthy. Another type of boundary is sexual boundaries, and that's obviously what it sounds like. The emotional, intellectual, and physical aspects of sexuality, which doesn't have to be sex generally, but it is a lot more like sexual harassment training, because it's violated when somebody touches you in a way you don't want them to touch you, or they say, you know, lewd comments or innuendos or things like that, or if they pressure you to engage in certain things that you don't want to engage in. That's violating your sexual boundaries, because everybody has different ones. I mean, no means no, right? Most of the time. Material boundaries refer to, like, obviously material stuff, like money and possessions and things like that. Healthy material boundaries involve setting limits on who you will share things with, and what you will share, and when you will share them. Like, it might be appropriate for you to lend your car to a family member, but not so much to somebody that you just met at the park, because there's so many people here at the moment. I can't believe how many people are here. Another type of boundary is intellectual boundaries, and that's thoughts and ideas. And healthy intellectual boundaries include, like, respect for somebody else's ideas, or an awareness of an appropriate discussion, like, is it wise to talk about politics or religion with this person right now, or should we just talk about the weather? Which, by the way, is flaming hot at the moment. Intellectual boundaries can be violated when somebody else, like, dismisses or belittles your thoughts or your ideas. Not that we've ever had anything like that happen, right? Everybody always agrees with us, right? Not. Time boundaries refer to how someone uses their time. Surprise, surprise, huh? To have healthy time boundaries, a person must be able to set aside enough time for each part of their life, which includes, like, work and relationships and hobbies and spiritual aspects if they're religious at all. Time boundaries can be violated when someone else demands too much of somebody else's time. A lot of times when you go back to the porous boundaries type people, the porous boundary type people tend to fall into the category of, like, being codependent. They get too involved in somebody else's life. They're living their life in somebody else's life, and sometimes they're not even living their own life. They're living somebody else's life and trying to manage their own. It can be a problem for a lot of different people just in that one relationship. So, healthy boundaries, porous boundaries, rigid boundaries. You can have one or the other or all three within each of these categories. So you have, let's say you have the physical boundaries thing. Let's say your physical boundaries is really rigid, but your emotional boundaries is really porous. Or your time boundaries is just like non-existent, which would be porous. And then let's say that your intellectual boundaries are really rigid or healthy or whatever. So you see how that works? So you have all these different types or arenas kind of boundaries, and then you have the three different types of the rigid, the porous, and the healthy. So just because you have rigid boundaries in one area where you're not willing to ask for help, or you keep people at a distance, doesn't mean that you have rigid boundaries everywhere. So if you have questions about boundaries, or you want to learn more about boundaries, leave me a comment or a thumbs up or something, and I'll see if I can put another video together for some type of boundary. I think I've seen mostly in my work of doing therapy, porous boundaries tend to be pretty high up there as far as the people seeking therapy, because they tend to be the more codependent type, the more seeking approval type, the more valuing other people's opinions over their own type, and so they go to seek therapy. Generally speaking, people with rigid boundaries who keep people at a distance and don't ask for help, well, there you go, don't ask for help, generally aren't the type to end up in therapy. That doesn't mean that one type of boundary is more therapy seeking than, more needing therapy than another. It's just one type is more likely to seek it than others. So there's no telling how, the split of how many is one type or the other in the world. But you can assess for yourself to see, oh, well, you know what, in this area I'm pretty lax, and in this other area I'm kind of rigid, or maybe I'm healthy in this other area. So again, if you want to learn more about boundaries, let me know. If not, well, you might be out of luck, because I might do another one later. Not always, but who knows? Remains to be seen. Anyway, for me and my goofy hat, which is taking a day off because it's not wet, although it should be, we will be back at some point, hopefully with a meandering video. I'm in a deficit here on the meandering videos because it's been too hot. Hopefully it'll cool down a little bit so we can get out and meander a bit. I have a few places in mind that I want to go, so maybe soon. If not, you're going to get stuck with another mental meander, because those are easier to do as far as meandering goes in the heat. Because right now it's about 102. That's why I'm standing in the shade under a tree, trying to keep the kids out of the background at the playground over there behind me. So anyway, I will sign off for the moment, and I'll talk to you later. I can't believe how many people are in this park right now. Satan called and he wants his weather back. It's like 102, and there's people everywhere.